then I figure that they're going to be okay regardless of the career path that they're in. And I think that that requires more than just rote learning, although it certainly requires good habits and discipline in school. It also requires that in the classroom they're getting the kind of creative teaching that's so important. And that's why our administration's initiated something called Race to the Top, where my Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, has helped to design a competition among states so that they can foster the kinds of excellence in learning everywhere, not just in some schools, not just in some states, but in every school in every state. If states want money, we're going to reward excellence, and we will show them, what has been proven to work in terms of encouraging the kind of critical thinking that all of our children need.
Mr. President, the number 2 category after jobs and economy that people submitted to was national security and foreign policy. And the number 1 question came from concerned conservative in Georgia who asked about your plans for the war on terror. And then Sean from Pennsylvania followed it up with, Dear President Obama, if we remove our troops from the war on terror, how will you continue to combat the threat of terrorism?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to understand that we are at war against a very specific group, Al-Qaeda and its extremist allies that have metastasized around the globe, that would attack us, attack our allies, attack bases and embassies around the world, and most sadly, attack innocent people, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of their religions. Al-Qaeda is probably the biggest killer of innocent Muslims of any entity out there. And so that is our target, and that is our focus. Now, they employ terrorist tactics, but we need to be clear about who our target is. And we have to fight them on all fronts. We have to fight them in very concrete ways in Afghanistan and along the border regions of Pakistan where they are still holed up. They have spread to places like Yemen and Somalia, and we are working internationally with partners to try to limit their scope of operations and dismantle them in those regions. But we also have to battle them with ideas. And we have to help work with the overwhelming majority of Muslims who reject senseless violence of this sort, and to work to provide different pathways and different alternatives for people expressing whatever policy differences that they may have. And I think we haven't done as good of a job on that front. We have to project economically, working in countries like a Yemen that is extraordinarily poor, to make sure that young people there have opportunity. The same is true in a place like Pakistan. So we want to use all of our national power to deal with the problem of these extremist organizations. But part of that does involve applications of military power, and that's why, although it is the hardest decision that a commander-in-chief can make to send our troops into battle, I thought it was very important to make sure that we had an additional 30,000 troops in Afghanistan to help train Afghan forces so that they can start providing more effective security for their own country in dealing with the Taliban, and ultimately allow us to remove our troops but still have a secure partner there that's not going to be able to use that region as a platform to attack the United States.
Well, another central issue in the war on terror right now is Guantanamo. Mm-hmm. And a lot of users wrote in about this. Actually, you know what? I think Guantanamo might come later. I think the next question is actually about Sudan, which you didn't actually address in your State of the Union, but it was actually the number 1 voted question, and it's a video from the Enough Project here in D.C.
Mm-hmm. President Obama, more than 3 million Darfuris fear returning home because of instability. Many fear that Sudan may be on the brink of war. What will you do to galvanize the international community to ensure that widespread violence does not occur in Sudan this year?
Well, the situation in Sudan has been heartbreaking, but also extremely difficult, and something that we started working on the day that I came into office. Our first task was, at that time, making sure that people who were in refugee camps in Darfur had access to basic water, food, other necessities of life. And this was after the Sudanese government in Khartoum had kicked out a whole bunch of non-governmental organizations that were providing assistance there. We were able to get that assistance back in to help, at least initially, stabilize the situation. The next step in the challenge is to broker a lasting peace agreement between rebels who are still in the Darfur region and this government. And I've got a special envoy who has been very active in trying to bring together the international community to get that deal brokered. Part of what makes it complicated is you also have a conflict historically between northern Sudan and southern Sudan. They finally reached a agreement after a lot of work, but the Sudanese now, the southern Sudanese now have an option where they may be seeking to secede from all of Sudan. That's another potential conflict that could create additional millions of refugees. And so what we are doing is trying to work with not only the regional powers, but the United Nations and other countries that have shown a great interest in this to see if we can broker a series of agreements that would stabilize the country and then allow the refugees who are in Darfur to start moving back to their historic lands. Sadly, because of the genocide that took place earlier, a lot of those villages are now destroyed. And so thinking about how to resettle these populations in places that are viable economically, that have the resources to support populations, is a long-term development challenge that the international community is going to have to support. We continue to put pressure on the Sudanese government. If they are not cooperative in these efforts, then it is going to be appropriate for us to conclude that engagement doesn't work, and we're going to have to apply additional pressure on Sudan in order to achieve our objectives. But my hope is that we can broker agreements with all the parties involved to deal with what has been an enormous human tragedy in that region.
The question we missed from the deck, but it was about Guantanamo.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, as you're saying, why is it taking so long to close down Guantanamo?
Right. Well, it's pretty straightforward. Number one, you've got a whole bunch of individuals in Guantanamo, some of whom are very dangerous, some of whom were low-level fighters, some of whom the courts have determined should never have been put there in the first place. We've had to evaluate each of those cases, hundreds of cases, one by one, to determine what these various categories are, and do it in a way that stands up to our standards of due process and legal scrutiny. Then we've got to figure out, if we're closing Guantanamo, where are we going to put them? And we have proposed that there are a number of options on the continental United States where you could hold these people as trials either in military commissions or in Article III courts are pending. But unfortunately, there has been a lot of political resistance, and frankly, some of it just politically motivated. Some of it people being legitimately scared about, well, if we've got somebody who we've been told is a terrorist in our backyard, will that make us target? One of the things that we've had to try to communicate to the country at large is that historically we've tried a lot of terrorists in our courts. We have them in our federal prisons. They've never escaped, and these folks are no different. But it's been one of those things that's been subject to a lot of, in some cases, pretty rank politics. And we've got to work through that process because Congress ultimately controls the purse strings in creating new facilities. If Congress makes a decision that they are going to try to block the opening of a new facility, it potentially constrains what our administration can do. And so this is something that we've got to work through both in Congress but also with public opinion so that people understand that ultimately this is the right thing to do. By closing Guantanamo, we can regain the moral high ground in the battle against these terrorist organizations. There's been no bigger propaganda weapon for many of these extremists than pointing to Guantanamo and saying that we don't live up to our own ideals. And that's something that I strongly believe we have to resist, even if it has some costs to it, and even if it's not always the most politically popular thing to do.
You know, Mr. President, we don't have much time left, but I want to make sure we get to the issue of energy and the environment. Right. One of the rare moments where you were able to get applause from your friends on the Republican side of the aisle in Congress the other night was when you mentioned nuclear energy. Yeah. And just today, your budget announced tripling the loan guarantees for nuclear reactors. A lot of people had questions about just how this will work and why you did that.
President Obama, record numbers of young people elected you in support of a clean energy future. If money is tight, why do you propose wasting billions in expensive nuclear, dirty coal, and offshore drilling?